Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In Orlando's bedroom, a suitcase stood silently, its navy exterior blending into the serene cream palette of the walls. Forgotten amidst the whirlwind of post-vacation work chaos, it lingered there, unnoticed. The memories of his Vermont getaway with Thomas and Michael were overshadowed by looming project deadlines, client meetings, and a never-ending stream of emails. As Orlando navigated his bustling schedule, his sister Penelope's request cut through the noise. She needed a suitcase for her conference in Boston. Sibling bonds prevailed. He readily agreed, offering his forgotten travel companion for her journey. Take whatever you need. That had been yesterday. Now, Orlando stood frozen in his kitchen, a forgotten mug of coffee cooling between his palms as he stared at the shopping bag on his counter. The tissue paper peeking from the top was emerald green with gold flecks. A handwritten card sat propped against it. His throat constricted as he set down the coffee and reached for the card with trembling fingers. For Halley. This green will bring out your eyes. Love always, Penny. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Air refused to enter his lungs properly. Orlando sank onto a kitchen stool, the card clutched in his hand, edges bending beneath his grip. She knew. The carefully constructed walls between his compartmentalized lives collapsed all at once. Orlando, sensible financial analyst, reliable brother, dutiful son, and Halley, confident, stylish woman who emerged for weekend trips with understanding friends, had never been meant to intersect. He'd been so careful. With shaking hands, he reached into the bag. The scarf unfurled like water between his fingers. Silk, in a deep forest green with delicate gold threads woven throughout. It was beautiful, thoughtful, perfect. The doorbell rang, startling him so badly he nearly knocked over his coffee mug. Orlando stuffed the scarf back into the bag and shoved it into a kitchen drawer before checking the security camera on his phone. Penelope stood in his hallway, hands clasped before her, wearing a patient expression he recognized from childhood, the one that said she wasn't leaving until they talked. Orlando pressed the intercom.
Pen, this isn't a good time. Open the door, Lando.
Her voice was gentle but firm.
Please.
He hesitated, then buzzed her in. The 60 seconds it took her to reach his door felt like an eternity. He considered hiding in the bathroom, running out the fire escape, pretending temporary amnesia. Instead, he opened the door to find his sister holding a pastry box from his favorite bakery and wearing the kind smile that had comforted him through scraped knees, high school heartbreaks, and their father's funeral. I brought those cheese danishes you like, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She set the box on the counter, then turned to face him. We should talk. Orlando crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, uncertain what to do with his hands. About what? Penelope raised an eyebrow.
Really?
The silence stretched between them until Orlando gestured helplessly toward the drawer where he'd hidden the scarf. When did you? He couldn't form a coherent question. 6 months ago, Jasper's Coffee on Newberry Street. Penelope leaned against the counter. You were wearing a burgundy dress with black boots. Your hair was styled differently, but I'd recognize my brother anywhere. The memory slammed into him. March. A rare Saturday when he'd felt brave enough to venture into a more populated area as Halley. The burgundy dress had been new, a splurge after his promotion. Why didn't you say anything? His voice sounded distant to his own ears.
Because it wasn't my place to force a conversation you weren't ready to have.
She opened the pastry box, casually extracting a Danish, as if they were discussing weekend plans instead of his most closely guarded secret. But when I borrowed your suitcase and found Halley's things, I realized maybe you needed to know you weren't alone with this. The careful way she said Halley's name, not mockingly, not with disgust, but with simple acceptance, broke something open inside him. His eyes burned. "The clothes were beautiful," she interrupted. "That rose-pink cardigan is exactly the shade I've always wanted to wear, but can't pull off with my coloring." She smiled. "You always did have better taste than me." A laugh escaped him, surprising them both. "I spent 3 hours finding that exact shade." "Of course you did. You're still you, whether you're Orlando or Halley." She pushed the pastry box toward him. "Eat something. Then maybe you can tell me about her?" Orlando took a Danish, the familiar comfort food steadying him. "I don't even know where to begin." "How about with how long?" He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully before responding. "If you mean how long have I known something was different, then always. If you mean Halley specifically," he swallowed hard. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Penelope's eyes widened slightly. "That's precise." "It was Thomas and Michael's anniversary party. They gave me a dress they'd bought. As a joke, they said. But I think they knew before I did." The memory warmed him. "They helped me with makeup, let me borrow a wig. It was just supposed to be for fun, for the party." "But it wasn't just for fun." Orlando shook his head.
The moment I looked in the mirror and saw her, saw myself, it was like finding a missing piece I hadn't even known was gone.
His voice broke.
I felt whole.
Penelope reached across the counter, her hand covering his.
"She's beautiful, you know. When I saw you,
her, in that coffee shop, my first thought was literally, who is that stylish woman?" A tear slipped down Orlando's cheek. "You're not disgusted by my sibling being their authentic self? Never." She squeezed his hand. "I'm only sad you felt you couldn't tell me." "I was afraid." The admission hung between them. "I know, but you don't have to be. Not with me." She retrieved the shopping bag from the drawer. "Now, will you show me how this looks on Halley? I spent an embarrassingly long time picking it out." For the first time since seeing the bag on his counter, Orlando felt something unfurl in his chest. Hope. Acceptance. Possibility. "I'll need about 30 minutes. He took the bag, clutching it to his chest like a shield. "Take all the time you need. I brought my tablet. I'll catch up on work emails." She settled onto his sofa, giving him space without leaving him alone. In his bedroom, Orlando locked the door, an old habit, and opened his closet. Behind winter coats and rarely worn suits was a hidden section, accessed by sliding a false panel. Inside hung Halley's carefully curated wardrobe. Everything matched. Everything had been chosen with intention. He selected a simple cream-colored dress with 3/4 sleeves, perfect for the early autumn weather. The foundation and makeup kit came next, extracted from their hiding place in a hollowed-out finance textbook on his bookshelf. The auburn wig, the most expensive item Halley owned, was stored in its special box on the top shelf. Methodically, Orlando transformed. First the makeup, applied with practiced hands, foundation to smooth, powder to set, contouring to soften his jawline, enhancing his cheekbones, eyeshadow in neutral tones, with mascara to lengthen his already long lashes, lips lined and filled with a soft coral that complemented the dress. The wig came next, auburn waves falling just past his shoulders, the color rich and dimensional in the afternoon light. He'd spent months researching, saving for a wig made of real human hair that moved naturally and could be styled. The dress slipped over his head, fitting perfectly across his shoulders, skimming past the silicone forms that gave him the subtle curves he'd chosen for Halley. Not exaggerated, just enough to feel right. Nude pumps with a modest 3-inch heel completed the physical transformation. But it was the moment he tied the new green scarf around his neck that Halley fully emerged. The color was perfect, bringing warmth to her complexion and, as Penelope had predicted, making her eyes appear more green than their usual hazel. Taking a deep breath, she opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. Penelope looked up from her tablet, her eyes widening as a smile spread across her face. "Oh," she said softly. "There you are." "Here I am," Halley agreed, her voice pitched slightly higher than Orlando's, but not artificial. She'd practiced for months to find the voice that felt right. Her voice. "What do you think?" Penelope set aside her tablet and stood, circling Halley with an appraising eye. "The scarf is perfect, if I do say so myself, but honestly, you're stunning. That auburn is your color." Halley touched the waves self-consciously. It took a while to find the right shade. "Well, you nailed it." Penelope stopped in front of her. "Would it be okay if I hugged you?" The question, so simple yet so profound in its understanding that this moment required consent, brought fresh tears to Halley's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Penelope's embrace was familiar, the same hug she'd given Orlando thousands of times, but somehow more meaningful now. When they separated, both were teary-eyed. "So," Penelope said, wiping her cheeks, "tell me about Halley. What does she like to do that maybe Orlando doesn't?" They settled on the sofa, and for the first time, Halley shared herself fully with someone who had known Orlando all his life. She talked about her love of art museums, how she felt freer to linger over paintings that Orlando would hurry past, how she enjoyed classic films, particularly the fashion of the 1950s, how she'd taken a secret weekend trip to Chicago with Thomas and Michael, where she'd spent 3 entire days as herself, never once returning to Orlando. "That weekend changed everything," Halley admitted, tucking her legs beneath her on the sofa. "I realized I wasn't just playing dress-up. This wasn't a costume. When I'm Halley, I'm more myself than I've ever been as Orlando." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "So, what happens next? Are you thinking about transitioning permanently?" The question hung in the air. Halley twisted the scarf between her fingers, considering. "I think about it constantly," she admitted. "But I'm terrified. Work, our extended family, friends who aren't Thomas and Michael. Whatever you decide, I'm with you," Penelope said firmly. "And I think you'd be surprised by how many people would support you." "Maybe," Halley managed a small smile. "For now, just having you know both sides of me feels like enough of a step." "Fair enough." Penelope checked her watch. "Are you hungry? We could order in, keep talking. Or if you need space to process." "Stay," Halley said quickly. "Please, I've spent enough time alone with this." They ordered Chinese food and talked for hours. Penelope asked questions. Some Halley had answers for. Others she was still figuring out herself. There was no judgment, only genuine curiosity and support. As evening descended, Halley found herself sharing the fear that had kept her isolated for so long. I always thought if people knew, if you knew, I'd lose everything. My job, my family, my identity. Penelope considered this. Instead of losing your identity, isn't it possible you're finding it? The real one? The question resonated through Halley like a bell being struck. I never thought of it that way.
Maybe it's time you did.
Penelope gathered their empty food containers. And while we're reframing things, can I offer another perspective? You didn't just trust me with a secret today. You gave me the gift of knowing my sister. Sister. The word sent a shock of recognition through Halley, followed by a wave of something she couldn't immediately identify. It took her a moment to recognize it as relief. Later, after Penelope had gone home with promises to call tomorrow, Halley remained on the sofa, still fully dressed, the green scarf soft against her neck. She opened her phone's camera and studied her reflection. The person looking back wasn't a disguise or a character. It was her, Halley, growing more confident with each moment of acceptance. She took a photo, the first she'd ever dared to keep of herself, and felt another wall crumble. 3 weeks later, Orlando sat in his therapist's office, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Dr. Mercer had been his therapist for nearly 2 years, but today's session was different. Today, he'd come with a specific purpose.
I need to talk about transition,
he said, the words tumbling out before he lost his nerve.
Not just social, medical, legal, all of it.
Dr. Mercer nodded, her expression neutral but kind. What's changed since our last session? My sister found out about Halley. He explained about the suitcase, the scarf, the conversation that had followed.
And once someone else knew, someone who's known me my entire life and still accepted me, it was like a dam broke. That kind of acceptance can be transformative, Dr. Mercer agreed. Tell me more about what you're thinking.
I'm tired of dividing myself in half. Orlando for work and family, Halley for secret weekends and trusted friends. He ran a hand through his short brown hair he now knew with certainty he wanted to grow long and auburn. I want to be whole. That's a significant realization. She made a brief note. Have you considered your timeline? Transition isn't a single event. It's a process, I know. He took out his phone and pulled up a document. I've been researching. I have notes on hormone therapy, legal name changes, voice training beyond what I've taught myself. He scrolled through the document. I know it's a lot, but now that I've decided, I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. Dr. Mercer reviewed his research, occasionally asking questions or offering additional resources. By the end of the session, Orlando had referrals to an endocrinologist specializing in transgender care and a speech therapist who worked specifically with transgender women. One step at a time, she reminded him as their session concluded. And remember, transition isn't just medical procedures. It's also about how you present yourself to the world, and most importantly, how you understand yourself. Orlando nodded, tucking the referrals into his bag. I already understand myself. I'm Halley. I've always been Halley. Everything else is just catching up to that truth. The corporate HR office wasn't where Halley had imagined this particular milestone taking place. She smoothed down her charcoal gray pencil skirt, adjusted her cream blouse, and touched the green scarf at her neck for comfort. The scarf had become something of a talisman over the past 2 months. Maureen, the HR director, returned with a folder and settled behind her desk. So, Orlando? Halley, she corrected gently. I'm going by Halley now. Of course, I apologize. Maureen's smile was professional but warm. Halley, I've reviewed the company policies, and I'm pleased to say we have comprehensive guidelines for supporting employees through transition. Relief flooded through her. Despite the company's general progressive reputation, she'd been preparing herself for a fight. We'll need some documentation eventually for legal name changes in our system, but we can update your email, nameplate, and internal directory immediately. Maureen passed her a form. This outlines the process, including options for how you'd like to inform your colleagues. Halley scanned the document, impressed by its thoroughness. I've already told my immediate team and my supervisor. They've been supportive. That's excellent. Would you prefer a company-wide announcement, or would you rather information be shared only as needed? Halley considered. I think an email to the finance department would be appropriate. I'd prefer to avoid making this a bigger deal than necessary. Maureen nodded. We can draft that together if you'd like. Is there anything else you need from us right now to make your workplace transition smoother? Bathroom access? Of course. You should use the facilities that align with your gender identity. If anyone gives you trouble, which they shouldn't, please report it immediately. The meeting continued with practical matters, updating badges, systems, and records. By the time Halley left Maureen's office, she felt lighter than she had in years. One more piece of her life aligning with her truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Penelope. How did it go with HR? Better than I expected. Everything is in motion. Celebratory dinner tonight? Thomas and Michael want to meet your new sister. Halley smiled. Tell them 7 p.m. at Vincenzo's, and remind Michael I still haven't forgiven him for that burgundy dress. It was way too obvious in public. He says that was the point. Something about forcing you out of your comfort zone. She shook her head, still smiling as she tucked her phone away and headed back to her department. Colleagues passed her in the hallway, some doing double takes, others offering encouraging smiles. Her supervisor had sent an email to their immediate team the previous day, so the dramatic shift in her appearance wasn't entirely unexpected. At her desk, a small vase of flowers greeted her with a card. Welcome, Halley. The finance team is lucky to have you. Devon. The gesture from her supervisor brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to ruin her carefully applied makeup, and turned on her computer to find her email had already been updated to reflect her name. The validation of seeing Halley Winters in her email signature felt more significant than she'd anticipated. Small changes, adding up to a life realignment. Stop fidgeting, Thomas scolded, reaching across the restaurant table to straighten Halley's scarf. You look gorgeous. The burgundy dress was my best idea ever. It was my worst nightmare, Halley retorted, but there was no heat in her words. She smoothed her hands over the dress in question, the same one Penelope had first recognized her in at the coffee shop. I spent the entire time terrified someone would recognize me. And someone did, Michael pointed out, raising his wine glass in Penelope's direction. Leading to this lovely dinner party. Penelope clinked her glass against his. I'm just happy to finally meet you two properly. Halley's told me how instrumental you've been in her journey. We merely provided the runway, Thomas said, with a theatrical wave of his hand. She was the one brave enough to take flight. Halley rolled her eyes at the metaphor, but felt a flush of pleasure nonetheless. The 4 months since Penelope had discovered her secret had transformed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Hormone therapy had begun to soften her features and redistribute her body's fat in subtle ways. Her legal name change was processing. Work had been surprisingly accommodating, and now, sitting in a restaurant with her sister and her two closest friends, all of them seeing and addressing her as Halley, she felt a contentment that had evaded her for most of her life.
Earth to Halley.
Michael waved a hand in front of her face.
We're discussing Thanksgiving plans.
She blinked, returning to the conversation. Sorry, what about Thanksgiving? Penelope gave her a knowing look. I was saying you should come to my place this year.
Mom and Dad always spent the holiday with me anyway, so it would just be continuing tradition.
The mention of their parents, both gone now, their father 3 years ago, and their mother the year before, brought a pang of both sadness and relief. They had never known Halley. She would never have to face their potential rejection. What about Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane? Halley asked, naming their father's brother and his wife, who traditionally joined them for holidays.
And their kids?
I already spoke with them, Penelope said, her expression cautiously optimistic. I told them Orlando had important news to share, and that it might be an adjustment, but that my support was unconditional. Halley nearly choked on her wine. You told them? Not exactly. I prepared them for the fact that something significant has changed in your life. Penelope reached for her hand. They love you, Halley. Give them a chance. The prospect of coming out to extended family sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach, but she nodded slowly. Okay, but I'll need you there for moral support. Always, Penelope promised. And these two are invited as well, if they don't have other plans. Thomas and Michael exchanged looks.
We never turn down free food, Michael said. Or front row seats to family drama,
Thomas added, earning himself a kick under the table from Halley. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but as the evening progressed, Halley found herself reflecting on how drastically her life had changed since that fateful day when Penelope borrowed her suitcase. From a life divided into careful compartments to one increasingly integrated. Not perfect. There were still challenges daily, from the occasional misgendering to the tedious bureaucracy of legal changes to the physical discomforts of transition. But authentic in a way that made those challenges worthwhile. Later, as they left the restaurant, Penelope looped her arm through Halley's. You seem happy, she observed. At peace? Halley considered this. I am. For the first time, I'm not constantly managing who knows what about me. I'm just living. That's all anyone can ask for. Penelope squeezed her arm. Though I do have one request. What's that? When your hair grows out long enough, let me help you dye it. I've always wanted to try being a hairdresser. Halley laughed, the sound carrying in the cool evening air. Not a chance. This auburn is too important to risk with your experimental techniques. Fine, be that way. Penelope grinned. But I get to help style it at least. Deal. Halley touched the ends of her wig, imagining the day her own hair would reach that length. It'll be nice to finally feel like it's all really me. It already is all really you, Penelope said softly. It always has been. Thanksgiving arrived with unseasonably warm weather, and Halley's anxiety at an all-time high. She stood before the mirror in Penelope's guest bathroom, scrutinizing her appearance for any flaw that might draw negative attention. The auburn hair was her own now, growing out nicely with professional styling that framed her face flatteringly. The forest green dress, chosen specifically to incorporate her color while being appropriate for a family holiday, fit well over her changing body. The makeup was subtle but effective, There was no denying she looked different from the Orlando their extended family had known all her life. But there was also no denying she looked right, like the person she was meant to be. A knock on the bathroom door startled her from her self-assessment. "They're here!" Penelope called through the door. "Whenever you're ready." Halley took a deep breath. "I'll be right out." She gave herself one final look, adjusted her ever-present green scarf, and opened the door to find Penelope waiting in the hallway. "You look beautiful," her sister assured her. "And remember, I've got your back no matter what." Together, they walked into the living room where Uncle Robert, Aunt Diane, and their 2 adult children, Christopher and Rebecca, were arranging coats and distributing the side dishes they'd brought. Thomas and Michael were already there, pouring wine and charming the family with stories of their recent trip to Spain. The conversation paused as Halley entered the room. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward her, expressions ranging from confusion to shock to, in Thomas and Michael's case, encouraging smiles. Uncle Robert recovered first.
"Orlando?"
he asked, his brow furrowed. "Halley," she corrected gently. "I go by Halley now." The silence that followed felt endless, though it probably lasted only seconds. Aunt Diane stepped forward, head tilted as she studied Halley's face.
"You look like your mother,"
she said finally. Something about the eyes. She had that same determined look when she'd made up her mind about something. The unexpected comparison broke the tension. Halley felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone could say to me right now." Uncle Robert joined his wife, still looking bewildered, but making an effort.
"This is quite a change."
"I know it's a lot to take in," Halley acknowledged. "And I'm happy to answer questions, though maybe not all at once, and preferably after I've had some wine." That earned a laugh, releasing more tension. Christopher and Rebecca approached next, each hugging her somewhat awkwardly but without hesitation. "Cool dress," Rebecca offered. "Green is definitely your color." "That's what Penelope said when she gave me my first scarf." Halley touched the matching accessory around her neck. The initial introductions complete, they moved to the dining room where Penelope had set a beautiful table. Conversation was stilted at first, with obvious attempts to avoid certain topics and occasional slips with pronouns or her name. But as the meal progressed and wine flowed, the atmosphere warmed.
"So, you're still in finance?"
Uncle Robert asked during dessert.
"Same company?"
Halley nodded. "Same job, same desk, same spreadsheets. Just different name on the door." "And they were okay with everything?"
"More than okay. They've been supportive."
She took a sip of wine. "I was prepared for the worst, but people have generally been kind."
"Well, you seem happier," he observed. "More comfortable somehow. Less reserved than Orlando always was."
The observation, coming from someone who had known her all her life but wasn't particularly close to her, struck Halley as profound. She hadn't realized her internal changes were so visible to others. "I am happier," she confirmed. "Being authentic will do that, I guess." Later, as they gathered in the living room for coffee, Aunt Diane sat beside her on the sofa. "I have a question, if you don't mind," she said softly, keeping their conversation somewhat private. Halley steeled herself. "Of course." "Your mother's pearl earrings, the ones she left you. Have you worn them?" The question was so unexpected that Halley could only stare for a moment. No, They're still in the safety deposit box with her other jewelry. Diane nodded thoughtfully. They would look lovely with your coloring. She'd want you to wear them, you know. Patricia always believed jewelry should be enjoyed, not stored away. Tears threatened again. You think she would have understood? About me? Your mother loved you fiercely. That wouldn't have changed. Diane patted her hand. It might have taken her time to adjust, as it will for all of us, but she would have wanted your happiness above all else. Across the room, Penelope caught her eye and raised an eyebrow in question. Halley gave a small nod and smile in response. This was going better than she'd dared hope. By the end of the evening, when hugs were exchanged and promises made to get together for Christmas, Halley felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Another hurdle cleared, another piece of her life reconciled. Well? Penelope asked after closing the door behind their departing relatives. How do you feel? Halley collapsed onto the sofa, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. Exhausted, emotional, but good, really good. Thomas refilled her wine glass. I think that went spectacularly well, considering. Not a single inappropriate question about surgery. Though Robert did keep staring at your chest, Michael pointed out. He was looking at my necklace, Halley corrected him. Apparently it was my grandmother's. Either way, they seem to be processing it remarkably well, Penelope said, curling up in an armchair. Christopher even got your pronouns right by the end. Small victories. Halley raised her glass. To family, both born and chosen. They clinked glasses, and as Halley looked around at the three people who had supported her most on this journey, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time, she truly believed she wouldn't face them alone. 1 year to the day after Penelope had discovered Halley's clothes in the suitcase, they met for coffee at Jasper's, the very coffee shop where Penelope had first recognized her sister in the burgundy dress. You're letting your hair grow even longer, Penelope observed, stirring her latte. It suits you. Halley touched the auburn waves that now fell well past her shoulders. I'm thinking of donating my wigs soon. I don't need them anymore. Milestone moment. Penelope smiled. You've had quite a year of those. Tell me about it. Halley counted off on her fingers. Hormones, legal name change, coming out at work, telling the extended family, finally mastering liquid eyeliner, that last one being the true challenge. You have no idea. Halley sipped her coffee, comfortable in the bustling cafe where, a year earlier, she'd been terrified of being recognized. I applied for the senior analyst position yesterday. Penelope's eyebrows shot up. The promotion? That's fantastic! We'll see if I get it. The competition is tough. Please! You were the most qualified analyst when you were Orlando. Now you're the most qualified and the most authentic. They'd be idiots not to promote you. Halley smiled at her sister's unwavering support. Speaking of authentic, I have something for you. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box, sliding it across the table. Penelope opened it, revealing a delicate gold bracelet with 2 intertwined infinity symbols. It's beautiful, she breathed. What's the occasion? 1 year since you found that scarf for me. 1 year of having my sister know the real me. Halley's voice caught. I wouldn't be where I am without you, Penny. Yes, you would, Penelope countered, fastening the bracelet around her wrist. You were always going to find your way to being Halley. I just had the privilege of being there when you did. They finished their coffee, chatting about ordinary things, Penelope's work, weekend plans, a movie they both wanted to see. As they gathered their belongings to leave, Halley paused, looking around the coffee shop. "What is it?" Penelope asked. "A year ago, I sat in that corner," Halley pointed, "terrified someone would see through my disguise. Now I realize there was never a disguise. And so, with a heart full of courage and a newfound sense of self, Halley marched onward into her destiny. The warm autumn sun illuminated their journey, marking their departure from the shadows. In that moment, Halley knew that she had finally arrived at a place of truth and acceptance, a place where she could proudly embrace her entire being. Together, the sisters walked towards the horizon, leaving behind any doubts or hesitations, and carving out a bright future where Halley's true essence would forever shine, endowing her with the inner peace she'd long been seeking. The end.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!